Have you ever apologized for something that wasn't even your fault? Like when a waiter brings the wrong order and you still say, sorry. Or when someone bumps into you and you instinctively step back and whisper, my bad. Maybe you hesitate before texting your friends because you don't want to bother them. You reread messages 5 times before hitting send. You wait hours to reply so you don't look needy. You tell yourself, they're busy. They don't need another problem. At work, you say, I've got it, even when you're drowning. You stay late so nobody thinks you're slacking. You avoid asking questions because you don't want to look incompetent. You'd rather struggle quietly than risk being too much. In relationships, you shrink without noticing. You say, whatever you want is fine. You stop bringing up things that hurt you. You convince yourself your needs are small, optional, negotiable. And deep down, there's a quiet fear you rarely admit out loud. If I need too much, people will leave. So you try to be easy. Low maintenance. Independent. Grateful for the bare minimum. But somehow, no matter how little space you take, you still feel like you take too much. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, this video is for you. Because feeling like a burden isn't a personality trait. It's a pattern. And once you see where that pattern comes from, everything starts to make sense. Now let's go deeper. There's a very specific kind of exhaustion that comes from trying not to be a burden. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. You still go to work. You still show up for people. You still function. But inside, there's a constant background calculation running in your mind. Am I asking for too much? Am I talking too much? Am I being annoying? Should I stop now? It's like living with an invisible volume knob that you're always turning down. You turn down your needs. You turn down your opinions. You turn down your emotions. You turn down your presence. And over time, you don't even notice you're doing it anymore. This pattern shows up in small, ordinary moments. Imagine this. Your day has been terrible. You had a stressful meeting, your car made a weird noise, and you feel emotionally drained. You pick up your phone and think about texting someone you trust. But before you type anything, a voice shows up. They're probably busy. They've got their own problems. You don't want to dump this on them. It's not that serious anyway. So you put the phone down. You scroll instead. You distract yourself. You tell yourself you're fine. But the feeling doesn't disappear. It just stays inside, unshared and unprocessed. This happens again and again. You need help moving. You don't ask. You feel lonely on a Friday night. You don't reach out. You feel hurt by something someone said. You don't bring it up. Instead, you adapt. You become the easy friend. The chill partner. The reliable employee. The independent adult. And everyone compliments you for it. You're so low maintenance. You're so easy to work with. You never cause drama. You're so strong. Those words sound positive. But they land in a reminding way. Because part of you knows the truth. You learned how to disappear in plain sight. And the strange thing is, people often admire this version of you. They admire your independence. They admire your calmness. They admire your ability to handle things alone. But what they don't see is the cost. The cost is that you rarely feel fully known. The cost is that you rarely feel fully supported. The cost is that you often feel emotionally alone, even when you're surrounded by people. Because real support requires showing need. And showing need feels dangerous. So you become hyper-aware of the emotional space you take up. Think about how often you say these phrases. Sorry. No worries. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about me. I can handle it. You say them automatically. You say them when someone cancels plans last minute. You say them when someone interrupts you mid-sentence. You say them when someone forgets something important to you. And every time you say them, you shrink just a little more. Not dramatically. Not noticeably. Just enough. This is why people who feel like a burden often struggle with anger. Not because they don't feel anger, but because anger feels forbidden. Anger takes space. Anger asks for change. Anger says, this matters. And if you already feel like you take up too much space, anger feels dangerous. So instead of anger, you feel guilt. You feel guilty for needing reassurance. Guilty for wanting attention. Guilty for feeling hurt. Guilty for wanting more. You might even feel guilty while watching this video. A small part of your brain might be whispering, this doesn't apply to you. Other people have real problems. You're being dramatic. Stop making everything about yourself. That voice is familiar, isn't it? It sounds responsible. Rational. Mature. But it's also incredibly harsh. Because here's the truth. Most people don't constantly monitor how much space they take. Most people text their friends without rehearsing the message. Most people ask for help when they need it. Most people express disappointment when they feel hurt. For them, needing doesn't automatically equal burden. But for you, the two feel inseparable. Needing equals bothering. Asking equals inconveniencing. Feeling equals overwhelming. So you try to need less. You become incredibly self-sufficient. You figure things out on your own. You Google everything. You troubleshoot everything. You fix everything yourself. And on paper, this looks like strength. You're capable. Independent. Resourceful. Responsible. But emotional independence taken too far becomes emotional isolation. You become the person who everyone can rely on. But rarely the person who relies on anyone. You're the one who listens. The one who shows up. The one who helps people move, proofreads resumes, gives advice, remembers birthdays. You're incredibly present for others. But when it comes to you, you hesitate. You minimize. You downplay. You might even struggle to answer a simple question. What do you need? Because your first instinct is, nothing. I'm good. Even when you're not. This is where the feeling of being a burden quietly transforms into loneliness. Not the loud kind of loneliness where you have no one. But the quiet kind where you have people, yet still feel unseen. You can be in a relationship and feel this. You can have close friends and feel this. You can have a loving family and still feel this. Because the loneliness doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being partially hidden. From constantly editing yourself. From constantly filtering your needs. From constantly presenting the version of you that takes up the least space possible. And the hardest part? Many people don't even realize this is happening. They just think, I'm independent. I don't like asking for help. I don't want to be needy. I'm just low maintenance. But underneath those sentences is a deeper belief. If I take up too much space, people will leave. And once that belief settles in, it quietly shapes everything. It shapes how you text. How you date. How you work. How you argue. How you apologize. How you love. It becomes the invisible rulebook you live by. And you follow it so naturally that it feels like personality, not survival. But where did this rulebook come from? Because no one is born believing they are a burden. So how does a person learn to feel this way? That's where we need to go next. No one is born believing they are a burden. Babies don't apologize for crying. Toddlers don't hesitate before asking for help. Little kids don't worry about being too much. They need loudly. They feel loudly. They reach loudly. So the real question is not why you are like this. The real question is what happened that taught you to shrink. Because feeling like a burden is not a personality trait. It is a learned emotional strategy. And most of the time, it begins in very ordinary homes. Not necessarily abusive homes. Not necessarily chaotic homes. Often just emotionally complicated ones. Imagine a child sitting at the kitchen table after school. They want to tell their parent about their day. Something happened at recess. Something that felt big to them. Maybe a friend ignored them. Maybe they felt embarrassed in class. Maybe they just want attention. They walk into the living room, ready to speak. But before they say anything, they pause. Their parent looks tired. Maybe stressed from work. Maybe distracted by bills. Maybe arguing with a partner. Maybe emotionally distant in a way that is hard to explain. Nothing dramatic happens. No one says stop talking. No one says you are a burden. But the child feels something subtle. Now is not a good time. So they turn around. They go back to their room. They tell themselves it is not important. And this moment repeats again and again for years. This is how emotional adaptation begins. Children are incredibly good at reading emotional weather. They learn quickly what gets attention and what creates tension. They learn when parents are overwhelmed, when emotions are inconvenient, when problems create stress, and when needs create friction. Without realizing it, they start adjusting. They become easier, quieter, less demanding. Not because someone asked them to, but because they love the people around them. Children do not think my parents cannot meet my needs. Children think my needs must be the problem. So they adapt. Many people who feel like a burden were the good kid. The responsible one. The mature one. The independent one. Maybe you heard things like you are so easy, you are so mature for your age, you never cause trouble, I do not have to worry about you. Those words sound like compliments, and in many ways they were. But they also carried an invisible message. Being easy makes you lovable. So you learned how to be easy. You learned how to self-soothe, how to figure things out alone, how to not ask for too much, how to not add stress. Adults loved this. Teachers loved this. Everyone loved the child who required less. Because a child who needs less is easier to parent. But children do not naturally need less. They learn to show less. The needs do not disappear. They go underground. In many families, children unintentionally become emotional support systems. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a conscious way. Just in subtle daily ways. A parent vents about work. A parent confides about money. A parent expresses stress, sadness, or frustration. And the child listens. They comfort. They reassure. They stay calm. The emotional roles quietly flip. Instead of the child being the one who needs comfort, they become the one who provides it. Once a child starts feeling responsible for an adult's emotions, a new rule appears. My feelings create problems. Their feelings matter more. From that point forward, the child begins to manage their emotional impact. They become careful, observant, emotionally strategic. They ask themselves questions no child should have to ask. Will this stress them out? Will this upset them? Is this a bad time? Should I keep this to myself? Slowly, they begin filtering their needs. There are moments that quietly shape this belief. Crying and being told stop being dramatic. Feeling hurt and hearing you are too sensitive. Expressing fear and hearing you are fine. Asking for help and hearing figure it out. Being upset and hearing it is not a big deal. Each of these moments teaches the same lesson. Your feelings are inconvenient. Not wrong, not unimportant, just inconvenient. And inconvenience feels dangerously close to rejection. So the child learns the safest strategy available. Minimize. Minimize emotions, needs, reactions, and problems. Be low maintenance. Be easy to love. Most parents never intend this. They are stressed, overworked, doing their best, carrying their own emotional baggage. But children do not interpret intention. They interpret patterns. The pattern becomes when I am easy, things feel calm. When I have needs, things feel tense. So the nervous system draws a conclusion. Being easy keeps connection safe. And connection is everything to a child. Children will give up authenticity before they risk connection every single time. By the time this child becomes a teenager, they stop expecting help. Not consciously, but quietly. They do homework alone, solve problems alone, process emotions alone, make decisions alone. Adults admire this independence. You do not need anyone. You are so strong. You have it handled. But independence built from necessity feels very different from independence built from confidence. One says I can do this myself. The other says I have to do this myself. And that difference changes everything. Needing still feels risky. Needing still feels uncomfortable. Needing still feels like pressure on others. So instead of learning how to depend, you learn how to function without depending. You become self-sufficient long before you become emotionally secure. By adulthood, the belief is no longer conscious. It is automatic. You do not think I am a burden. You feel it. It shows up in hesitation, second-guessing, overthinking, apologizing, overworking, and people-pleasing. It becomes the invisible rulebook running in the background. Do not ask for too much. Do not need too much. Do not feel too much. Do not take up too much space. Because somewhere deep inside, a younger version of you still believes that if you become difficult, you might become unlovable. And once this belief settles in, it does not stay in childhood. It follows you into friendships, careers, and romantic relationships. That is where the pattern begins repeating in adult life, often in ways you do not even notice yet. Once you grow up believing you are a burden, this belief does not stay quietly in the background. It starts shaping the way you move through adult life in ways that feel normal to you but confusing to everyone else. It becomes the lens through which you interpret relationships, work, friendships, and even small daily interactions. And the most important thing to understand is this: the pattern does not disappear when you become an adult. It evolves. In adulthood, no one is telling you to be quiet. No one is telling you not to need anything. No one is telling you that your feelings are inconvenient. And yet you still act as if they are. This is because the rulebook has moved inside you. You became the one enforcing the rules. You become your own emotional gatekeeper. Think about how this shows up in friendships first. You are the friend who listens for hours. The friend who gives thoughtful advice. The friend who remembers birthdays, checks in, helps people move, edits resumes, and sends supportive messages late at night. You are present, reliable, dependable. People feel safe with you. People open up to you easily. But when the roles reverse, something shifts inside you. When it is your turn to share, your brain suddenly becomes very busy. You start editing your story while telling it. You skip details. You soften emotions. You shorten the conversation. You wrap things up quickly with phrases like, "But it's fine," or "I'm probably overreacting," or "It's not a big deal." You rush toward minimizing your own experience as fast as possible. And the moment the conversation shifts back to the other person, you feel relief. This relief is important. Because it tells you something. Being the listener feels safe. Being the one with needs feels exposed. So you slowly build friendships where you are the emotional support system. Not intentionally. Not consciously. It just happens. And over time, this creates a quiet imbalance. You feel deeply connected to people, but you rarely feel deeply supported. You tell yourself you are just independent. You tell yourself you do not need much. But every once in a while, a wave of loneliness hits you out of nowhere. And you cannot quite explain why. This same pattern follows you into romantic relationships, but here it becomes even more intense. Because romantic relationships activate the deepest fears about closeness and rejection. When you believe you are a burden, love becomes something you try to earn by being easy. You become low maintenance. You become agreeable. You become flexible. You avoid conflict. You tell yourself compromise is love. You tell yourself patience is love. You tell yourself understanding is love. And all of these things are part of love, but slowly, quietly, they become your entire role in the relationship. You stop asking for reassurance because you do not want to seem insecure. You stop bringing up issues because you do not want to seem dramatic. You stop expressing disappointment because you do not want to seem ungrateful. You stop saying when you feel lonely because you do not want to seem needy. And something very subtle happens. The relationship becomes comfortable for the other person, but emotionally cramped for you. You start living in a smaller emotional space than the relationship actually allows. You shrink preemptively. You anticipate inconvenience before it exists. You solve problems before they are spoken. You silence needs before they are expressed. You might even find yourself attracted to people who need a lot from you emotionally. Partners who are struggling, partners who are overwhelmed, partners who are distant or emotionally unavailable. Not because you consciously want this, but because it feels familiar. When the other person has big needs, your own needs feel smaller in comparison. And smaller feels safer. There is a strange comfort in relationships where you are the stable one. The supportive one. The understanding one. Because as long as you are focused on their needs, you never have to risk exposing your own. But this comes with a cost. Eventually, resentment begins to grow quietly underneath the surface. Not explosive resentment. Not obvious resentment. Quiet resentment. The kind that sounds like exhaustion. The kind that feels like emotional burnout. The kind that makes you wonder why you feel so tired even when nothing is technically wrong. You might start thinking things like, "I give so much but no one really shows up for me." Or "I feel like I carry everything." Or "I feel invisible in my own relationships." And then immediately after thinking those things, guilt appears. Because feeling resentful feels selfish. And feeling selfish feels like proof that you are, in fact, a burden. So you push the resentment down. You minimize it. You tell yourself you are lucky. You tell yourself other people have it worse. You tell yourself you are being dramatic. And the cycle continues. This pattern also shows up strongly in work and career. At work, being a burden often translates into overperformance. You take on extra tasks. You volunteer for things others avoid. You avoid asking questions. You avoid saying no. You stay late. You double-check everything. You over-prepare. You over-deliver. You become the person who can handle anything. From the outside, this looks like ambition and dedication. From the inside, it feels like fear. The fear of being seen as incompetent. The fear of being seen as replaceable. The fear of being seen as difficult. So you work harder than necessary to justify your presence. You may struggle to ask for raises. Struggle to ask for help. Struggle to set boundaries. Struggle to say you are overwhelmed. Because admitting you are overwhelmed feels dangerously close to admitting you are too much work. And once again, people admire you for it. They call you reliable. They call you hardworking. They call you a team player. And part of you feels proud. But another part feels permanently tired. Over time, this constant self-minimization creates a strange emotional experience. You start feeling like you are everywhere for everyone, yet nowhere for yourself. You are constantly available, constantly useful, constantly present. But rarely fully expressed. And this leads to one of the most confusing feelings of all. You start feeling lonely in rooms full of people. Lonely in relationships. Lonely at work. Lonely in friendships. Because loneliness is not just about physical presence. It is about emotional visibility. And when you spend your life hiding your needs, people cannot respond to needs they never see. They cannot support feelings that are never spoken. They cannot reassure fears that are never shared. So the belief that you are a burden becomes self-reinforcing. You do not ask for support, so you do not receive support. You do not express needs, so people assume you do not have needs. You do not take space, so people stop noticing the space you are not taking. And the brain quietly interprets this as confirmation. See, you tell yourself, people do not really show up for me. Which reinforces the original fear. If I ask for more, I will be too much. This is how the pattern repeats in adulthood. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Through small daily choices. Through tiny acts of self-minimization. Through constant emotional editing. And after years of living this way, something deeper begins to happen. The belief that you are a burden starts turning inward. It stops being just about other people. It becomes part of how you see yourself. You begin to question your own worth. Your own importance. Your own right to take up space in the world. And this is where the pattern becomes even more powerful. Because it is no longer just about relationships. It becomes part of your identity. And once a belief becomes part of identity, it starts shaping the way you see yourself every single day. Which is exactly where we need to go next. When a belief becomes part of your identity, it stops feeling like a thought and starts feeling like truth. You no longer notice it as something you learned. It feels like something you simply are. Feeling like a burden slowly transforms into a deeper question: do I actually deserve space? This is where the pattern becomes psychological instead of just behavioral. It moves from what you do to how you see yourself. One of the biggest forces behind this shift is something called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is what happens when your nervous system learns to constantly scan the emotional environment for signs of tension, disappointment, or rejection. It is the emotional equivalent of always checking the weather before stepping outside, except the weather you are checking is other people's moods. You notice tone changes instantly. You notice pauses in text messages. You notice facial expressions shifting mid-conversation. You notice when someone seems distracted, quiet, or slightly different than usual. And because you learned early that your needs might create stress, your brain tries to detect stress before it even happens. So your mind begins asking silent questions all day long. Did I say too much? Did I talk too long? Did I overshare? Did they seem annoyed? Did that message sound needy? Should I have said that differently? Most people do not run these calculations constantly. But for someone who feels like a burden, this emotional scanning becomes automatic. It is exhausting, but it feels necessary. Because your nervous system believes it is preventing rejection before it happens. This leads to something else, emotional pre-editing. Before you speak, you edit. Before you ask, you filter. Before you share, you minimize. Conversations become carefully curated versions of what you actually feel. Imagine writing a message to someone you care about. You type the message. Then you reread it. You delete a sentence. You soften the tone. You add a smiley face so it sounds lighter. You remove the part that sounds too emotional. You reread again. You wait before sending. You reread one more time. This is emotional editing in action. It feels normal to you, but it is actually a sign that your nervous system believes your raw emotions might be too heavy for others. Over time, this creates a split between your internal world and your external world. Inside, your emotions are complex, deep, and intense. Outside, you present a simplified version of yourself. A lighter version. A smaller version. And the more you edit yourself, the more disconnected you begin to feel from your own emotions. Because emotions need expression to feel real. They need space. They need air. They need to move outward. When emotions stay internal for too long, they transform. Sadness becomes numbness. Frustration becomes fatigue. Loneliness becomes emptiness. This is why people who feel like a burden often struggle to identify what they feel. When someone asks "How are you?" the answer that comes out automatically is "I'm fine." Not because you are always fine, but because you have trained yourself not to check too deeply. Another important piece of this pattern is the inner voice that develops over time. The voice that questions your needs before anyone else can. The voice that says do not overreact, do not be dramatic, do not make this bigger than it is. This voice often sounds responsible and rational. It sounds mature. It sounds grounded. But it is also incredibly strict. It holds you to a standard you would never hold others to. If a friend needed reassurance, you would give it freely. If a friend asked for help, you would not see them as a burden. If a friend expressed hurt, you would validate them. But when it comes to you, the rules are different. You expect yourself to handle things quietly. To be resilient. To be understanding. To be self-sufficient. This inner voice becomes a form of self-policing. You monitor your own emotional impact before anyone else can react. You stop yourself before anyone else has the chance to stop you. This creates the illusion that you are simply low maintenance. But what is actually happening is self-restriction. And here is the paradox. The more you restrict your needs, the more intense they feel internally. Because needs do not disappear when ignored. They accumulate. They build quietly in the background. You might notice this in moments when emotions suddenly feel overwhelming and you cannot explain why. A small disappointment feels huge. A small rejection feels crushing. A small conflict feels unbearable. It is not because you are too sensitive. It is because you have been carrying unexpressed needs for a very long time. Another important concept here is emotional responsibility. When you grow up feeling responsible for other people's emotions, you start believing you are responsible for how people feel around you. You start believing it is your job to keep things smooth. Your job to keep things calm. Your job to prevent discomfort. So you become the emotional stabilizer in every environment. You smooth conversations. You diffuse tension. You adapt to moods. You adjust to personalities. You become incredibly flexible. But flexibility without boundaries becomes self-erasure. You bend until you no longer know what your original shape was. And this leads to one of the most painful experiences of all, feeling invisible. Not because people ignore you, but because they do not see the parts of you that remain hidden. They see the helpful version. The calm version. The easy version. The reliable version. But the deeper emotional layers remain private, protected, and unshared. This creates a strange emotional contradiction. People may describe you as strong, independent, and capable. Yet internally, you may feel fragile, uncertain, and unseen. This gap between how others see you and how you feel creates confusion. You may even feel guilty for feeling unhappy. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. And this is where the belief becomes deeply rooted. You start believing your emotional struggles are not valid enough to be shared. Not serious enough to be expressed. Not important enough to take space. This belief quietly shapes your sense of worth. You start measuring your value by how little trouble you create. By how easy you are to be around. By how much you can handle alone. You become proud of needing less. Proud of asking less. Proud of handling everything quietly. But underneath that pride is exhaustion. Because the human nervous system was never designed to function without emotional support. Humans are wired for connection, reassurance, and shared experience. When you try to live as if you do not need those things, your nervous system does not become stronger. It becomes tired. And this exhaustion often shows up as anxiety. Or overthinking. Or emotional fatigue. Or the constant feeling that something is wrong even when life seems stable. Because deep down, your nervous system is still waiting for permission to take up space. And that permission never arrives from the outside first. It has to start internally. Which brings us to the final part of this journey. Because once you begin to understand this pattern, something new becomes possible. Understanding this pattern does not instantly make it disappear, but it changes something very important. It gives you language for a feeling that may have been with you for most of your life. And once you can name a pattern, you can begin to see it instead of simply living inside it. For a long time, feeling like a burden probably felt like a personality trait. Something natural. Something fixed. Something that simply described who you are. But the moment you start recognizing it as a pattern, the story begins to change. Because patterns are learned, and what is learned can be slowly unlearned. The first shift begins with a simple but powerful idea. Needing does not make you a burden. Needing makes you human. Every person you admire has needs. Every person you love has needs. Every person you feel close to has moments of vulnerability, insecurity, and emotional dependence. The difference is not that they need less. The difference is that they learned it was safe to need. And safety changes everything. When you grow up believing that your needs create tension, you start treating your emotions like problems to solve instead of experiences to share. You try to manage them alone. You try to shrink them. You try to make them quieter before anyone else can hear them. But connection does not grow in silence. It grows in shared experience. It grows in moments where someone says, "I am not okay," and the world does not fall apart. It grows in small risks of honesty. This is why change does not begin with big dramatic actions. It begins with very small experiments. Tiny moments of letting yourself take up slightly more emotional space than you are used to. It might look like sending the message instead of deleting it. Asking for help with something small. Saying "I had a hard day" without immediately minimizing it. Admitting you feel overwhelmed instead of saying everything is fine. These moments may feel uncomfortable at first. Your nervous system may react with anxiety. You may feel exposed, guilty, or even selfish. But discomfort is not danger. It is unfamiliarity. You are stepping outside the emotional rulebook that kept you safe for a long time. And your brain needs time to learn that the rules have changed. Another important shift is learning to notice your inner voice with curiosity instead of obedience. That voice that says, "Do not be dramatic, do not be needy, do not be too much." Instead of automatically believing it, you can begin asking a new question. Who taught me this? Often, the voice sounds like your own, but its roots are older. It formed in environments where minimizing yourself helped maintain connection. It was protective. It was adaptive. It helped you navigate situations where being easy felt safer than being fully expressed. Recognizing this can bring compassion instead of criticism. Because this pattern did not appear randomly. It developed to protect connection. It developed to keep relationships stable. It developed to keep you safe in ways that made sense at the time. And acknowledging that protection is important. Because you are not trying to erase a part of yourself. You are trying to update a strategy that no longer serves your adult life. The truth is that adult relationships are not built the same way childhood relationships were. Healthy adult relationships are not threatened by needs. They are strengthened by honesty. They are deepened by vulnerability. They become more stable when both people feel safe to take up space. And this leads to one of the most healing realizations of all. The right people are not overwhelmed by your needs. They are invited by them. Think about the people you feel closest to. Chances are, the bond grew stronger during moments of honesty, vulnerability, and shared difficulty. Moments where someone trusted you enough to show their real emotions. Moments where you felt trusted enough to show yours. Connection is not created by perfection. It is created by mutual humanity. This does not mean everyone will respond perfectly. Some people may be uncomfortable with emotional honesty. Some relationships may not deepen in the way you hope. But that does not mean your needs are the problem. It simply means not every environment is designed for emotional closeness. Learning this takes time. It takes patience. It takes repetition. It takes many small moments of choosing expression instead of minimization. Over time, something subtle begins to change. The fear that once felt overwhelming starts to feel quieter. The hesitation before asking for help becomes shorter. The guilt after sharing feelings becomes softer. The emotional space you allow yourself slowly expands. You begin to experience a new kind of connection. Not connection built on being easy, but connection built on being real. And with that comes a surprising feeling. Relief. Relief from constantly monitoring yourself. Relief from constantly editing your emotions. Relief from constantly trying to justify your presence. You begin to feel what it is like to exist without apologizing for existing. This does not happen overnight. It happens gradually, through many small steps. But each step moves you further away from the belief that you are a burden and closer to the understanding that you are simply human. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is this. The part of you that learned to shrink was trying to protect connection. But the part of you that is learning to expand is trying to experience it. And you deserve to experience connection without shrinking to fit inside it.